Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Baughman, one of the staff members at the fundraising school at Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. It is my pleasure to welcome you to another edition of Fridays with the Fundraising School. This is an opportunity for us to gather together to share our questions, insights, and maybe even our concerns about fundraising during this time in American history. We're looking forward to hearing from our two guests today, Ann Merkel and Perry Hayes, who have a unique understanding of philanthropy. I have to mute myself, I apologize for that. Who have a unique understanding of board engagement and fundraising from the business sector. Before I turn this over to Dr. Sarah Nathan and Kathy Brown with the Fundraising School, I do want to remind you that we are still open for business. On our website, we have previous webinars and podcasts available. We are running courses online, and we hope to have in-person classes in Indianapolis starting at the end of August. We know that times have been tough, and our goal is to help support you and your mission. Now I'm going to turn the webinar over to Dr. Sarah Nathan and Kathy Brown, both of whom are Associate Directors at the Fundraising School. Take it away, Sarah.
Thanks, Jennifer. Let's give Jennifer a little virtual applause. She really has been such an instrumental part of the fundraising school's team since we have transitioned so much of our work into this virtual space. So thank you, Jennifer. Happy Friday, everyone. I am so happy to be with our fundraising community today. Fundraisers are my people. So I'm really happy to see you. And thanks for spending a little time with us as we all kind of collectively try to figure out how we keep ourselves going during this, really challenging time. You can use the chat box in the YouTube stream to let us know your questions throughout our session today. And as we get started, let us know how you're doing in the chat box. I mean, if you've got to go on vacation, yay. If you're looking forward to that vacation, if you're feeling anxious or concerned or optimistic or pessimistic, just let us know how you're feeling today as we get started on this last day of July. Kathy?
Yes, thanks, Sarah, and welcome everyone. I'm also excited to be with you all today. And I am just excited in general, particularly to chat with our guests about engaging boards in the business sector. As Jennifer shared, we're joined by Ann Merkel, who serves on the Board of Visitors for Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. Ms. Merkel is a founding member of the National Bank of Indianapolis with over 30 years of banking experience in the Indianapolis region. Her role as Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Development Officer for the bank is where Ms. Merkel is responsible for cultivating and maintaining high-profile corporate, individual, and community relationships. And in addition to being honored with a Sagamore of the Wabash Award in 2016, congratulations, that's a big honor for anyone who's not familiar in Indiana. She has also served on boards of many nonprofits in the Indianapolis region. Currently, she's serving with Fairbanks, the Greater Indianapolis Progress Committee, the Renaissance Charitable Foundation, and the United Way of Central Indiana. And also joining us today is Perry Hines, who joins Ann on the Board of Visitors for the Lilly School of Philanthropy. Mr. Hines is a former corporate marketing executive and now serves on as principal of the Hines Group, LLC, which is a data-driven consulting firm helping businesses with strategic marketing, communications, public relations, fundraising, and more. He has over 27 years of C-suite experience in general management, brand communications, marketing, and Fortune 100 companies, including little groups like General Mills and Target, and several others. And in 2018, he was elected as an independent director of Horace Mann Educators Corporation. In addition to receiving numerous awards, including Indianapolis Business Journal's 40 Under 40 and Who's Who in Black Indianapolis, Mr. Hines has an extensive background in volunteering and serving in the nonprofit leadership capacity, including leadership roles with Indiana-based nonprofit organizations such as Truth at Work, Indiana Black Expo, and most recently, Shepherd Community Center. And in addition to his thriving consulting practice in his spare time, Mr. Hines also serves as the Director of Advancement for Covenant Christian High School. So welcome, both of you. Wow, I am honored to be with both of you, and we're really looking forward to our conversations. And so let me start with just checking in. How are both of you? How are things going for you right now? And maybe kick us off.
Well, Kathy, thank you so much for those wonderful introductions. Everyone, I believe, is continuing to move forward in times that are extremely uncertain. As you mentioned, I'm in the banking industry, so we are considered an essential service and have been working very hard to serve all of our clients during the pandemic. And so we make adjustments as necessary on a daily and sometimes an hourly basis to make sure that we are continuing to provide the highest level of service possible in the safest environment for our clients and our employees.
Awesome.
And from my perspective, well, thanks, first of all, that was quite a lengthy introduction. It's not well deserved, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Well, from my perspective, both as an entrepreneur as well as there at the high school, who, we're just dealing with it, like Ann said, hour by hour, day by day, particularly as schools develop and their plans for reopening. We're actually set to reopen next week. Since it's a private Christian high school, it's like that we open really early. And so all summer, it's just been chaotic, actually, just trying to figure out what to do from all the various aspects. At the same time, making sure that we have a quality education prepared or plan prepared for our students. I just think people are uncertain right now.
Mm-hmm.
But as chaotic as it is and uncertain as it is, I'm very hopeful. From a fundraising standpoint, I think this is an extremely interesting time for us to have what I call courageous conversations. And I think the environment is set for us to have those courageous conversations. And anytime you have a courageous conversation, it's really gonna help the relationship. And we know relationships are the basis of everything we do.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Courageous conversations. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure we have a lot of guests with us today who are who might be getting ready to send their kiddos back to school in some format. So thanks to you, Perry, and your colleagues for figuring out what that means for the students that you serve and families. I know in our household with a rising second grader, it feels like we're on this second wave of major disruption.
Sure.
So there's a lot of anxiety in our house right now, and I'm sure others are feeling that as well. So you both have extensive corporate experience and corporate philanthropy, corporate giving experience. I was wondering what you both are seeing as it relates to corporate philanthropy right now. What are you observing and experiencing?
I'll go first, Ann.
Great.
What I'm seeing is that while there's a hesitancy, I think people in general rise to the occasion. We're actually seeing a slight uptick, mainly because when you are in a situation like this, a very uncertain, chaotic time, if you have had a really good relationship with your donors and from a philanthropy standpoint, I think if you engage them the right way and have those conversations, I think people are willing to step up to the plate. And actually, we aren't really seeing a great reduction in giving. We're seeing some shifting in terms of timing and things like that. But right now, we're getting ready to ramp up into our busiest time of the year. We all know that between August and end of the year is the busiest time for fundraising and for corporate development and fund development. So the jury's still out, but we remain extremely hopeful by what we've seen so far over the summer months.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Ann?
I would have to say that from the donor standpoint, the corporate donor standpoint, we have been talking a lot with our clients that we have supported in prior years. We work very hard to provide support to as many of our clients as possible. And many times that support comes in the form of a corporate sponsorship. So obviously that dynamic has changed. And as a result, I think many organizations realize the importance of reaching out and communicating and saying, here's what we need to do in today's environment because it is different, because it looks different, or maybe we can't do our normal events at all. How does they're inquiring as to how that feels or how that might change the priorities of the corporate donor. So I think it's very wise for organizations to have those conversations and to reach out and say, does our shift impact you as a corporate donor, as a corporate funder? And if so, do we need to alter what we're doing together? Or, it's also an opportunity, I think, for organizations to say, we need programming dollars or we need general support dollars right now. Would you be willing to rethink your annual support? And I would say from the corporate standpoint, those are very good conversations to have, because in our case, yes, we're very, most of our conversations like that have resulted in a shift from shifting those dollars from sponsorship dollars to programming or special needs, whatever that organization is experiencing.
And that happened because the nonprofit recipient really initiated those conversations with the bank.
That's correct.
With your, that is a really great advice. Are either of you seeing any shifts, maybe more broadly among your peers in the corporate world, shifts in the motivations or interests of businesses for their philanthropic work right now? We've heard a lot of small businesses have been very negatively impacted during this time. Are you seeing differences in what corporations are giving, the types of corporations are giving, maybe, and their motivations and interests? That was a really big question.
Well, I think I understand what you're saying about motivations, Sarah, but I have to echo exactly what Ann is talking about in terms of the shift in sponsorship to general operating. There was a time in this business where general operating dollars was taboo. People only wanted to give to programmatic dollars or special events or things like that. That has completely changed. I think the pandemic really highlighted the need to shore up those organizations that we feel strongly about and that we love and are passionate about, shore them up with operating dollars so that they can succeed and they can survive, to have that special program or to do that special event another day or another year. So I do, and I totally echo that from a sponsorship standpoint. And actually, those are some of the conversations that we've had. And we've been pretty successful in shifting sponsorship dollars and they're not quite as lucrative to the operating side, but they're not going away either, totally. And so I totally understand that. In terms of, Sarah, your question about motivations, I think that goes hand in hand with the shifting of the dollars. They're motivated to make sure that the organizations that they love and care about are around next year, because it is such uncertain times, and this, the economic reality is that I think we're in this for a good long time here. I hate to be a downer and be negative, but we have to plan for a down economy for the next 12 to 18 months. And what does that mean from our businesses? Because we just, Covenant is celebrating 25 years this year. We're not going to go away. Ann's Bank, the Bank of Indianapolis, and the banking sector will not go away, but we will look very different. We will look very different in the next 12 to 18 months. And so the motivation, Sarah, I think goes hand in hand with the shift that we're seeing and how the dollars are given.
That's great perspectives.
I think certainly what Perry says is on point. I do believe, and this underscores the need for the importance of communicating with your corporate donors. There are very few industries that have not been impacted during the pandemic. And they have had to make some very tough economic decisions. No one is immune from that. And so I think that having these thoughtful conversations about, we as a nonprofit organization have been impacted. We know that you, as a for-profit organization, have also been impacted. So how are we going to continue to work together? I think that both parties in that conversation need to have an understanding that this is a very different environment than it was a year ago. And as to Perry's point, it is going to continue to be a very tight economic environment.
How will we continue to work together? What a like great opening question when we have these conversations with donors. And I would say even maybe with our individual donors or maybe some of our board members during this time. That was a beautiful question, Anne. How will we continue to work together?
Hey, Sarah, can I add something?
Yeah, please.
You know, I think big events have gone away for the time being.
Yeah.
You know, we're looking at our annual plan, and we usually highlight it with a big annual gala or dinner or anything like that. And we're even looking at November to December canceling or changing it. I mean, so far out, you think July to November is a long way. It really isn't. We all know that that's right around the corner. And so we just recently had a courageous conversation to say we're probably going to have to look at changing our annual plan, and that contributes half of what my annual plan is for the whole year. So how do we have those conversations and change the dynamics? But I think that the organizations, Anne's question is, how will we give going forward? We will give to the organizations that have thought this through. I think donors will give to the organizations that have been thoughtful and have planned far ahead so that they can communicate up front and have those courageous conversations to do the shift and let them know that, hey, we may not be doing our annual fundraising event, but I usually have 300 people there, but I'm going to touch base personally with 100 to 200 of you, in a personal conversation or a personal Zoom between now and November. And essentially that's what we have to do.
Mm-hmm. I do think that this too is an opportunity to go back to the part of your question, Sarah, about motivations for giving, and whether it be from an individual donor standpoint or a corporate donor standpoint. I think it is important for an organization, if at all possible, to show the donor how their services can be translated. How have they pivoted? How have they taken their funding, their sources of funding, and directed them to not only continue their mission, but make sure that they are addressing some of the social needs that have come up through the pandemic. And I think that those are stories that resonate, because everybody who gives $1 as a donation wants to know what impact that dollar is having. And if there's something that dollar can do to ease the situation of another citizen, or to help them become more independent and self-sufficient economically in the future, then those are conversations that really touch everybody's heart. It doesn't matter whether you're a corporate leader or an individual in the community. I think that those are if you can share those stories. I know this is something that in philanthropy you are trained to do, but truly it's good training, because it helps a donor understand how they can help in today's environment.
That's right.
The pivot to bringing in that sort of support to need to make that a current request, or make that feel current, it is that really resonates with me. I actually just served on a grant review committee, and one of the various proposals had done that. You could tell they'd taken a proposal that had been well designed already, and they'd added in the language about how that was relevant right this minute to some issues. And it really made that proposal stand up and stand sort of forward from the other ones. So I appreciate that. I appreciate thinking about that. I'm gonna shift us to ask you to put your board hats on for a minute, and then we'll sort of tie this together as we go. But I'm curious how you're feeling now about board engagement through these uncertain times. What have been your observations, just in general as board members and in working with boards?
Barry,
It's,
you want-
yeah, sure, I'll take that. It is more important than ever before. You have got to make sure that your board, particularly for nonprofits, are engaged in every aspect of your business, in every aspect of your organization. And I'm a general believer that effective and efficient board engagement really starts from day one, and that's board orientation. So you're going to see a lot of movement. We've already seen in some of the boards, nonprofit boards I'm on, and even the corporate board that I'm on, we've seen movements back and forth based on individual circumstances and situations. And I think it's more important than ever. It provides a great time. Board orientation provides a great opportunity for them to get the board member engaged from day one about goals and expectations, and also in the lifeblood of the organization. Just get them involved in. And I think it's important for us to go very deep with boards to begin to engage them and make it fun. You know, one of the things that we did for our top donors as well as our board this summer, you know, in the middle of all of this pandemic things, and the board meets usually at Covenant Christian High School, meets once a quarter, to do fun things with them. Like we delivered cookies, hot, warm cookies to them, you know, from a local bakery here in Indianapolis. And even though they were one of our donors, they were a board member. And that really engaged them to let them know that we're still here, we're still working. You are very important to us, and we want to make it fun and just have another conversation, even if it's at your front door, and even if I have to put the cookies down so that we don't touch, it's still board engagement. So make board engagement fun, start from day one at board orientation, and get them involved in all levels of your organization.
Mhm. Yeah, food always works, Perry. Good idea.
Chocolate chip cookie, particularly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that, Perry, you hit on the importance of that relationship between the individual board member and the organization. And I have served on lots of different boards, and I will tell you that I am most engaged and I enjoy most those relationships where there are personal connections with leadership, where leadership takes time to really find out what it is that motivates that individual to serve on the board, to be a donor. I think if you are on a board, you should also be a donor. So one and the same. I think too that organizations need to be really transparent when they are talking with potential board members, and then again during the orientation process, with the expectation of what they need from their boards. Board being able, especially in this environment of virtual board meetings, being able to really connect with those board members is even more challenging than usual, but critically important in order to really keep their head in the game, because there's so much now that is very distracting. You know, letting your board members know that you need them more than ever to help make connections, to help with strategic visioning. All of those high level things that boards should be doing. To me, there's nothing worse than sitting through a board meeting where it is truly nothing but reporting out.
Yeah.
So, you know, how can we, if there are things that you can do, like Perry suggested, you know, things you can do in a board meeting or outside of the board meeting to make that personal connection and find out how Perry and Ann want to serve your organization, I think that's very important.
But it also goes back to your question about, I hate to keep going back to your question about motivation, Sarah, why is that board member there? Hopefully they're there more than just for resume padding, but why are they there? There was some reason that they joined your board or said yes to the board invitation. And so recognizing why your board members are there is key. And that really goes back to that orientation phase. If you understand and have set goals, hopefully all of our folks out there listening today have set individual goals for each of their board members, and they recognize why the board member is there. Then it's easy to personalize those relationships. It's easy to have those connections in the boardroom and out of the boardroom. But now the challenge, of course, is staying connected, because we can't meet in person oftentimes, and that whole communications thing of staying connected. But what I've found is if you continue to engage them in non-traditional ways and keep them informed, it could be stuff that's not even, that's germane to your specific organization, but it helps them and their daily life as a, member of the business community or any other aspect of their life. If you give them information, help them stay informed, I think that will be that will go a long way toward helping us engage our board members.
Excellent. Just the idea of keeping people involved. I often will talk to colleagues that will share their boards are not as active as they want them to be, particularly in say fundraising or specifically in corporate engagement. And so my first question is always, well, how have you engaged them? How have you, what have you asked them to do that they have not done? And I do sometimes get the blank stare, that, oh, don't they just naturally know these things? Well, sure, but they also live in the real world. So in thinking about boards and the fundraising component, observationally or from experience, we've got several colleagues that have asked us about how to better engage boards in the fundraising process in general, and then we'll come back to the sort of the corporate relationships specifically.
I think that, again, being honest up front as to the expectations of your board from a fundraising standpoint is important. Both be prepared to articulate what the personal expectation is from a contribution or donation standpoint. But I would also say, depending on the individuals that are on your board, they have different access in the community. They have different relationships in the community. So working with those board members to engage them in making introductions. I think that oftentimes when someone gets on a board, they fear that they are going to have to go make an ask. Only having a case in front of them, a case for support. But I think it needs to be communicated to your board members that it is really a partnership. The organization needs to look to the board member to assist, to make that connection, but assure the board member that the organization has the technical ability to make the ask and to follow up. It's those introductions and that relationship, that assistance in building the donor relationship that I think the board member can bring. And before I forget, this is a little off topic, and then I'll stop, Perry, so you can talk. And that is, I think that it is so important for the organization. Once a board member facilitates an introduction and a gift has been made, it is incumbent upon the organization to follow up with those donors and to take responsibility for the cultivation. Then, how to continue to engage that donor and how do you continue to grow then their interest in your organization. It doesn't just stop with the introduction that the board member makes. In fact, we're putting our reputations out there, right? When we make an introduction. And we need then the organization to come in and provide that ongoing support after we've made that connection.
I couldn't say anything more than what Ann just said. But what I will add to that is if you can get your board members engaged in the strategy up front, instead of just handing them a piece of paper or a list of names or contacts, they have a lot to contribute, and they can actually help you with the formation of their strategy. I always think the earlier the better to get the board engaged in the upfront strategy. Now, you can't, there can't be lots of strategy talk and no action, right? And Ann's been talking about the action part. If you can just back up and involve them in the strategy portion, then they'll take ownership and they will have a greater, deeper sense of responsibility on the action side. But then again, it switches back to the organization, and they have to be the folks who follow up and have to do the hard work, frankly.
Right.
You don't expect your board members to do the hard work and the heavy lifting. They've opened the door, they've lent you their network, and hopefully upfront lent you their expertise in the strategic discussion. And then it's up to the organization to walk through the door. So I liken it to the board member helping to open the door, but the organization has to walk through the door.
Yeah.
Good example.
Agreed. And before we kind of jump, or I guess meander back over to our tying this specifically to corporate partnerships, yeah, sorry, I'll just wander a little. I did want to also get some observations, given a lot of what's going on, certainly in the environment in general, about your observations around diversity in boards, and the diversity, equity, inclusion conversations or experiences that you are seeing or hearing right now.
A ton of them. Yes, a ton of conversation around this from all different aspects, from the giving aspect to the board recruitment aspect to actually, the staff, what's the makeup of your staff and your organization, and that's actually in the middle of one of those conversations. That's really where I coined the phrase courageous conversations. It is courageous to have those conversations. But if you're not going to have them now, if not now, when are you going to have those conversations? If not now, it is on the tip of everybody's thought process, from the donor, when they're giving their dollars to an organization, they want to know these issues or these even statistics, to the organization itself. Before I forget, like Ann said before, I'm seeing a lot of one-time grants in terms of this whole cultural aspect, in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and the adaptability of the organization and flexibility for them to highlight what they've been doing in this regard. There are a lot of dollars out there for a lot of these grants and these one-time kind of gifts right now around diversity, equity, inclusion. Not to say they won't continue, but right now there seems to be a flood of them. And if you're not having these courageous conversations and discussing diversity, equity, inclusion issues, you may miss those opportunities for the additional dollars for your organization. But more importantly, you probably missed an opportunity to really improve the culture of your organization. And so, to answer your question, there are a ton of conversations happening in all different ways. And so I think we can take advantage of a lot of it.
Great, thank you. And observations in your case as well?
Well, I think Perry stated everything very eloquently. This is the right time. I know that boards have struggled for a very long time about what should our board makeup be, who should be on our board, what skill sets do we need on our board. So I think that this is both a time to evaluate where your gaps are, what you need, but also there needs to be kind of a shift, I think, in how we are thinking about our board members. Certainly we want thought leaders. We want people who will have courageous conversations and take courageous actions, based on those conversations. We need to find, as boards, there's not a lot of diversity on boards, and that's because there hasn't been a lot of diversity in corporate leadership. And oftentimes boards look for community and corporate leaders. And I think it's very important that we continue to make sure as our young professionals are coming up, that we are providing the skills necessary, the leadership skills, as well as access and experience. Because you know, someone who is, a lot of the conversation before today was, how do we engage millennials? How do we get millennials on our board? Well, this flows into this entire, I think, very important goal of having diverse boards. Now is the time, I think, for all of us to start looking at what we need to have on our board a lot differently than we have in the past. And those are hard conversations to balance, just because there are lots of needs in the organization. Well, let's make sure then that our young talent has the skills to fulfill those needs.
Absolutely. Ditto to everything Ann just said. As a member of the minority community, if you do have people of color or women or any other minority group on your board, don't leave it just to them. You know, don't put all the burden on them for this conversation. You know, this is the time to step up. All the board members need to step up, both from a nonprofit standpoint and a corporate board standpoint. It is everyone's responsibility. We know that the organization, whether it's a corporate organization or a nonprofit organization, does better, is more effective, and achieves more the more voices they bring to the table, the more opinions and more thoughts that they bring to the table. And what's going to happen is sometimes that means your criteria for board membership has to change. On the corporate board side, it used to just be retired ex-CEOs who are on corporate boards. Now we're getting a lot of people who are 50-something or even 40-something that are on these corporate boards who may not be a retired CEO, who may be in the C-suite, but not a retired CEO. On the nonprofit side, it used to be people who fit a certain profile or mold. And it started with the millennial conversation, but I don't think it's just the millennial conversation anymore. It's people with different skill sets, and a lot of people with different skill sets may not have the age, if you will, or the experience in a sector, but they're good at what they do. And to engage them with that, it means your board is going to look a lot different than it currently does. And if it doesn't, shame on you.
And for the better, right? Your board will be the better for it. And we know that is documented now in a lot of research. So if this is something your organization is struggling with, or your board is still a little bit hesitant to talk about seriously, there is a lot of research that tells us that more diverse boards actually raise more money.
Absolutely.
and better represent the community, and therefore hopefully have better programs. You know, I do feel a little bit of hope in this moment in our kind of collective consciousness in the US, that the nonprofit sector can lead the other sectors as it relates to improving our equity, our stance on equity, and our inclusion of all people in our community. So I feel a little hopeful for that.
Yep.
I'm going to meander back to thinking again more about our corporate sponsors, corporate partnerships, corporate donors. And we talked a little bit about how board members can be engaged in fundraising broadly. Is there any other insights you might be able to share with us about how board members can be better involved or more involved with those corporate donors or sponsors?
All right, I'll start. I think they can be involved from the relationship standpoint and making introductions at any level. You know, typically it's the C-suite introductions, but I do believe that we all, someone said earlier this afternoon that all of this is about relationships, and it truly is. And I probably have a lot of professional or personal connections that share similar interests and thoughts that I do on topics of education, social service, whatever. So I think that you can look not just to your board members to make individual introductions, but also to help connect you to other corporate donors.
I agree. One of the things that, one of the little tips and tricks, I think, to getting more corporate donors, if you will, consider creating an advisory board, not the operating or governance board, but an advisory board. And hopefully populate that advisory board with a lot of big and small business owners, right? Or people in big, large corporations. Typically, what we found is advisory boards lead to relationships. Relationships, of course, lead to donations. And so when you engage someone and you want their advice, if you have this other board who's an operating board or governance board who has a fiduciary responsibility to make the decisions, well, this advisory board, it's a low bar entry point to understand the organization and to basically become an advocate and an ambassador for them. And hopefully that will lead to donations later down the road. But I think an advisory board is a good way to start.
I think that's also that kind of same thought process is behind the development of young professional groups that support nonprofit organizations. It's a way to educate them, involve them. And I also feel excited about engaging those younger individuals, and we know that the younger generations in America are much more diverse. So it is a great way to capture a more diverse audience and help build a pipeline of future board members.
Sure.
So,
another thing to consider is corporations have more than just money to give or funds. There are a lot of non-monetary options. In our city, Eli Lilly does a huge day of service. That is probably the most ubiquitous example of an organization giving back, but it's giving back in non-monetary ways. Eventually, of course, it costs them dollars because the employees are out serving the community, but it's not a direct dollar hit to the bottom line. So consider what other non-monetary options could you help hopefully engage corporations to help your organization with the goals that you're trying to set.
True.
The idea of really thinking about different ways to engage can help people. I think it helps that involvement, that feeling of connection. And I guess as we're thinking about, a lot of our colleagues have sent in questions that you all have been really just answering beautifully. Thinking about mapping out your connections and kind of more what that looks like versus just the physical. Yes, they work there, so that means they know them. But thinking more about those meaningful connections and those experiential opportunities can be really powerful in helping engage more with our corporate community. I guess as we're starting to kind of wrap our time together, as board members, what do you most appreciate? What has been a great experience for you? And what has been helpful for you as board members?
I love people, and I love the opportunity to engage with people on all different levels. And if as a board member, I'll put on my board member hat right now. If I'm a board member and going to spend my time and my financial resources to support an organization, I'm only going to do that if I can have a relationship, or relationship makes it so much better. I appreciate a relationship. It's nothing better, and Ann probably has done this too. There's nothing better than to be out, in the old days at a restaurant Feels so weird to say go out to a restaurant to eat dinner, but to be at a restaurant and then see someone else that you serve with on the board or someone else that is in the organization. I so appreciate the ability to connect and have personal relationships outside of my official role as a board member. And so I really appreciate the openness, for particularly for staff people. If you know someone's on the board, you see them out eating dinner, or see them outside of the normal setting. I'd implore you, please don't be afraid to engage them and talk to them. As a board member, I so appreciate that, because mostly, I think most board members are pretty much extroverts and people-oriented folks, except our folks on the finance committee. They're always the financial people,
Hey, wait a minute.
But Ann is that rare talent of financial mind as well as being an extrovert. But I think we all enjoy the people side of the business, if you will. So that's what I appreciate.
Well, I think that's, you've hit one of the very, very important points. And it's kind of ironic that we're finding ourselves in a year where we can't connect like we normally do. Having those personal connections are extremely important. We're humans. We all crave human interaction. And so that is what I think is very important to me as a board member, as well as as a corporate donor, but as an individual donor as well, are those relationships. And if I can see each time that I can see an organization's mission at work and the positive outcomes, the stories, if I can be involved, not just hearing those, but actually witnessing them,
Yep.
then all of the hours that I spend reviewing sponsorship budgets or attending and participating in board and committee meetings, all of those hours, it really becomes so much more worth it. And letting your board know that you appreciate the skill sets that they're willing to share. And you do that through those relationships, engaging them in your mission. So I think we're saying the same thing. It's all about relationship, regardless of your industry.
And in case people haven't gotten this point, a simple thank you goes a long way. And that thank you can be in the form of, something as silly as delivering hot, warm cookies to them, or a little thank you note. Just people want to be appreciated. And you said, what do I appreciate? I appreciate being appreciated. And a simple thank you is all that's needed. Nothing tied to it, nothing else involved. It's just a simple thank you. It goes such a long way.
About a month ago, I got a card, a snail mail, handwritten card from the CEO of the organization on which I serve, whose board on which I serve. And it just felt so lovely because it came out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it. It was very heartfelt. I was like, oh, that felt really nice to be acknowledged and appreciated in that very kind of private way.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think those are wonderful examples of showing appreciation. Here's another example that I think is important, and that is when board members or volunteers share an idea or raise a concern. It's important for the administration of the organization to acknowledge that, even if it's a hard, even if it's one of those courageous conversations that Perry's been talking about. I think that if a board member is asking questions or sharing ideas, if those are never acknowledged or addressed, or if conversations don't happen, that's probably another really easy way to lose that board member, to lose that donor. making sure that even if you don't agree, some validating sometimes is just like that special thank you that you get when everything's positive. So I think that's just another example of how you show appreciation for the thought that people are putting into your organization.
Sure.
We've had a couple of questions in the chat box here that are kind of similar, so we'll try to tackle them in the time that we have remaining together. We're all doing a lot of Zoom meetings these days. You probably have been on a board meeting via Zoom. I have. In addition to those really lovely porch straps like Perry you've done, and I have received one as well. Do you have any other things you've seen or ideas for how we can continue to engage our donors or board members meaningfully in this more virtual space?
Well, I think it goes back to knowing the motivation for why your donors give or your board members serve. And to the extent that you can, if you acknowledge or understand me so well as to know what's important to me, for instance, as an individual donor, knowing my wife's name, knowing my birth date, those things go such a long way, and those things are important to me. And so therefore, if you know those things are important to me and you acknowledge that or appreciate that, then that tells me that I am more than just my time with you as a board member or my checkbook as a donor. It means you really understand me and you care about the things that I care about. And so sometimes that's another. Here's another example from a donor perspective. I knew that one of my donors loved wrestling, and I live in Carmel, and I knew that he was going to be at the Carmel High School when we did have those Carmel High School wrestling match on a Saturday morning. I just on the hunch that he would be over there watching wrestling. I went over there, and he was there, and we just sat there and watched his son at a Carmel High School wrestling match. And don't you know that donor, unsolicited, just gave a donation, later, pretty large donation. But I cared about the things he cared about. And it was like 2 minutes from my house. Yeah, it was a Saturday morning, but we all know as fundraisers and as donor development people, our work never stops.
We co-hosted a webinar not too long after the pandemic forced everybody inside their homes on how to make your virtual board meetings successful. And I remember some of the points were, it's more important than ever when we're all looking at little boxes along the top or bottom of our screens, to engage, to be very specific. Yes, it's important to have dialogue and the relationship building conversations, but also be very specific in your agenda. Stick to the agenda, stick to the time frame, and check. Make sure that that Anne's paying attention and not just looking, off to the side and checking texts and emails. And I think it's very challenging. Engagement is going to be something that I think leaders need to think about with virtual meetings. How do we make sure that, we need to be talking about important things on our board meetings. So we really need to make sure those board members who are participating are engaged. So I do think that finding ways to make sure your board members are participating in these conversations is very important. And I think the smaller the group, the easier that is. I think once you get 50 people in a Zoom meeting, that's really challenging.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, my goodness, I want this conversation to go on forever, but I know you all have many other things to do. So for everyone listening, we'd love to know more about what else you are interested in hearing and learning about. And we want to also thank both Anne and Perry for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your expertise, for sharing your empathy with us. I know that in our courses, both live, again, back when we got to do that, and online, we get lots and lots of conversation about board engagement and board, and a lot of our questions were pretty specific around that. So thank you for sharing your experience and your perspective, and giving us a chance to bring some of those to our colleagues. Before we close, just some quick headlines as part of our TFRS at Your Desk program. We're going to continue these Fridays with the Fundraising School. In addition, we've got free podcasts that continue on. You can find information on the website on the topics, see what's coming up. You can also listen to past sessions. Following our Indiana University protocol, we are, with our fingers crossed, hopeful that our live in-person courses will begin starting on August 24th. You can also find more about that on our conversation or on our websites. Stay tuned because we're continuing to do more virtual course opportunities. Our certificate in current affairs fundraising will return in 2021 with resilient fundraising. And you can find all of this at the website at philanthropy.iupui.edu/the fundraising school. And you can certainly also always find us on social media. So friends, as we wrap today, let's continue to stay in touch. Now more than ever, the world needs our philanthropic sector. We need you. We're here for you. We're cheering for you. So keep taking those deep breaths. I know we're all doing a lot of that. Keep taking care of yourself. Keep working to take care of each other. And for all of my colleagues at the Fundraising School and the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, I'm Kathy Brown, and we can't wait to see you again. Thanks so much, everyone, for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Enjoy your weekends.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Happy Friday.
Bye. Bye, guys. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Bye. Great.